I shouldn't have looked at her like that, but how could I not? She walked into my house for the first time, her arm linked with my son's, yet her eyes, those sharp knowing eyes, locked onto mine. It was barely a second, maybe even less, but it felt like she had stripped me down to my very core, like she had seen something. I didn't want her to see Daxton. "This is my dad," Leo, my son Ethan, introduced, oblivious to the strange energy crackling between us. "Dad, this is Daxton." She smiled, sweet, innocent, respectful, a perfect mask. But I saw it, the subtle shift in her lips, the way her gaze flickered up and down before settling on my eyes again. "Mr. Calloway," she greeted, extending a hand. I hesitated for half a second before shaking it. Warm, soft, where her fingers lingered. A moment too long, before she pulled away. My throat went dry. I was losing my mind. She was Myson's girlfriend, his girlfriend. "So Daxton," I said, forcing a casual tone. "How did you two meet?" She smiled at Ethan, before answering, but she was still looking at me. He sat next to me in a lecture. I noticed he kept staring, so I said, "Hello?" Ethan chuckled. I was just trying to figure out if I'd seen her somewhere before her lips twitched. "And had you?" He shrugged, number, but I was shopping to a smooth recovery he had, his mother's charm. But I wasn't looking at my son. I was watching Daxton, and she was watching me that evening. I tried to stay composed. I was polite, engaging, the perfect host. But every time she laughed at something Ethan said, every time she reached across the table for her glass, I felt her stealing glances at me, testing, pushing. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was projecting some ridiculous fantasy onto a girl who was barely more than a stranger. But then, just before she and Ethan left, she walked up to me while he grabbed his jacket. "It was nice meeting you, Mr. Calloway," she said softly. There was something different in her voice, something suggestive. She reached out as if to shake my hand again, but this time her fingers brushed against my wrist. Before trailing away, a fleeting touch but deliberate, she left. I stood, frozen. What the hell had just happened? I barely slept that night. I kept replaying every second of our interaction, convincing myself I had imagined it. Maybe she was just overly friendly. Maybe I had read too much into it, but my body knew the truth before my mind could deny it. The next morning, I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when Ethan walked in, stretching lazily. "Daxton liked you," he said casually, grabbing an apple from the counter. I froze. "What?" He chuckled. She said, "You seemed cool." Not what she expected. I took a slow sip of coffee, masking the unease creeping under my skin. And what did she expect? I don't know. He shrugged. "Some strict, intimidating guy, I guess." But she said, "You were different." The way she had looked at me, like she saw something Ethan didn't. I forced out a chuckle. "Well, I'm glad she approves, yeah." Ethan said, chewing his apple. "Shevan asked if you'd be at the game this weekend. I told her you don't really do college football, but she said she'd like to see you there anyway." There it was. Again. A subtle push. A test. "Maybe I'll stop by." I muttered, more to myself then. Ethan left for class, and I tried to shake the thought of her. But that evening, just as I was settling in with a book, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Unknown Mr. Calloway. It frowned who the hell before I could ask. Another message popped up. Unknown. "It's Daxton. Ethan gave me your number in case I ever needed anything." Lie, he wouldn't have done that unless she asked him. Tommy fingers hovered over the screen. It shouldn't respond. But I did me. "Everything all right, Daxton?" "Yes. Just wanted to say. I meant it when I said it. Was nice meeting you." A long pause. Then another message. "Daxton, I wasn't expecting you to look so young." My breath hitched. She was pushing again. I didn't reply. I put my phone face down and ran a hand over my jaw. "Ethan's girlfriend, Andy." The phone buzzed. One last time. "Daxton, good night. Mr. Calloway." I didn't sleep that night. Either I should have blocked her number, I should have shut this down before it became something dangerous, but I didn't that. Saturday I found myself standing in the crowded stadium scanning the bleachers until I spotted Ethan and Daxton she was leaning in, laughing at something he said, her dark hair catching the sunlight. But then, as if she sensed me, her head turned and she smiled. It wasn't the polite smile she'd given my son. It was something else. Ethan noticed me and waved me over. "Dad, you actually came." I forced a smirk. Thought I'd see what all the hype was. About I settled into the seat next to Ethan, but I could feel the occasional brush of her knee against. Mind the way her perfume drifted over. Every time she leaned forward I was hyper-aware of. Every small detail. At halftime, Ethan ran off to grab snacks, leaving us alone. "Did you sleep well?" "Mr. Calloway?" she asked, her voice low, teasing. I exhaled sharply. "Daxton." She turned home, eyes glinting. What? I clenched my jaw. "This whatever you're trying to do, it's not a game." She tilted her head, studying. I know a slow, tense silence stretched between us. Then she leaned in her lips, barely an inch from my ear. "You didn't reply to my message last night," she murmured. I waited. Her voice sent a sharp jolt. Down my spine I swallowed. Because I had nothing to say, she pulled back, her eyes locked onto mine. Liar Ethan returned, oblivious, handing me a bottle of water. "You guys good?" Daxton smiled, effortless and sweet. "Yeah. Your dad was just keeping me company. I needed to get out of there." As soon as the game ended, I made an excuse about work and left, before Ethan could ask me to stay longer. But just as I got home, my phone buzzed again. "Daxton, you ran away. Mr. Calloway." I exhaled. My hands were gripping the steering wheel too tightly. "Me go home, Daxton." A pause, then Daxton. Make me. A slow, suffocating heat settled in my chest. This was getting dangerous, and I wasn't sure I wanted it. To stop. I should have ignored her message. I should have walked away instead. I sat in my parked car, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Her words weren't just reckless. They were deliberate, and I knew exactly what she was doing for 10 agonizing minutes. I resisted the urge to reply, but when I finally stepped inside, my house, the tension had burrowed deep into my skin. I barely had time to take off my jacket before another message came in. "Daxton, I think about you more than is." Should I closed my eyes? Ethan's girlfriend. Ethan's girlfriend. Ethan's girlfriend. But then, another text. "Daxton Doe. You think about me. Mr. Calloway." A sharp exhale left my lips. I should have shut it down. I should have told her this. Was inappropriate, that whatever she was, feeling was misplaced. But I didn't. Instead, I made the worst decision yet. Stop this. I didn't mean for it to sound like a challenge, but I knew instantly. That's exactly how she took it. Because, seconds later, my phone buzzed again. "Daxton, come outside a chill." Shot through me number. No way. I strode to the window. My heart beat, hammering against my ribs. And there she was standing at the end of my driveway. Hands stuffed into her jacket pockets, looking at me like she already knew I wouldn't send her away. It should have. Instead, I found myself opening the door. She took slow, measured steps toward me. And when she finally stood in front of me, her gaze didn't waver. "You don't listen, do you?" I muttered. Jaw tight. She smiled. "Neither do you." A tense silence stretched between us. She was too close. The air felt thick, like something unspoken had taken shape between us. "You shouldn't be here." "Daxton," I said, my voice lower than I intended. She tilted her head, but her eyes searched mine, looking for something, a weakness, a crack I couldn't give her one. I took a step back. "Go home for the first time." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. But then she smiled slow and knowing, "You'll see me again." "Mr. Calloway." She turned and walked away. Disappearing into the night, I shut the door. locked it, but the damage was already done because I wanted her to come back. I told myself it was over, that she got what she wanted, a reaction, and now she'd move on. But deep down, I knew. Better 3 days passed. 3 days without a single text, a single glance, a single mention of her from Ethan. I should have been relieved instead. My mind played cruel tricks, waiting for my phone to light up, for her name to appear. It didn't, and that should have been the end of it. But then on the 4th night, I walked into the kitchen after a late meeting, exhausted, only to freeze in my tracks. Daxton sitting at my dining table. My pulse slammed against my ribs. What the hell was she doing here? Ethan's voice snapped me out of it. Dad, Daxton's staying for dinner. Hope that's cool. Cool number. No, it was not cool. But I forced a neutral expression, nodding as I shrugged off my coat. Of course, you know. Guests are always welcome. She smiled, but her eyes told a different story. A private challenge reminder that she had power in this game. We were playing dinner was a slow, torturous experience. Every time she reached for a glass, every time she laughed at something Ethan said, I felt her gaze flicker toward me, testing, measuring me. And I was failing. Because my body responded before my mind could catch up, catching every tiny detail, every small movement, every slight shift in her voice. Then the moment I feared happened. Ethan's phone rang, and he sighed, pushing back his chair. I got to take this, it's coach. He shot me a look. Be nice. Dad, he walked out, leaving me alone with her silence settled between us. I swallowed, staring down at my plate. You're playing. Dangerous game, Daxton. Her lips curled. So are you. I finally looked up, meeting her gaze. Head on, you need to stop. Do. As she murmured, leaning in just slightly. Because I think you like it. I gritted my teeth. You don't know what you're talking about. She tilted her head, studying me like I was something to be figured out. Do you want me to leave? She asked the smart. Answer was yes. The right answer was yes. But my silence said something, else her lips parted just slightly, as if she could hear my thoughts. You make this too easy. Mr. Calloway. Ethan's footsteps echoed from the hall. Daxton leaned back, smoothing her expression just as my son walked in. Sorry that took longer than I thought, he said, glancing between us. Everything good. Daxton smiled effortlessly, casual. Yeah, your dad was just telling me about his work, a lie, a clean, effortlessly, but Ethan bought it, and I realized then this girl was more dangerous than I ever imagined. I should have ended it that night. I should have told Ethan. The truth should have drawn a line so thick that even she wouldn't dare cross it. But I didn't. Instead, I let it fester. I let her stay in my head. Days passed, and though we never spoke about it, the tension between us thickened. It was in the way she watched me when she thought no one else was looking, the way my body reacted before my mind could catch up, and then it happened. One night, Ethan had a late practice, and I came home earlier than expected. The house was dark, silent, until I heard the faintest sound from the kitchen. I stepped in and froze. Daxton standing by the counter, her phone in one hand, a glass of water in the other. She turned at the sound of my footsteps, her ex unreadable, "Oh, hey." I clenched my jaw. What are you doing? Here. Ethan said I could wait inside. She answered smoothly. He'll be here soon. Silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the clock on the wall. I should have left, walked away. But then she moved closer. You're mad. At me, she murmured, tilting her head slightly. Aren't you? I exhaled, gripping the back of a chair. I'm not playing this game. With you, Daxton. She took another step. You already are. My pulse pounded against my skin. You need to leave. She studied Metho's sharp, knowing eyes flickering with something unreadable. Do you want me to? A pause, a dangerous, damning pause. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down Ethan's, her slow, almost amused smile crossed her lips. Guess I should go. She turned to walk past me, but just before she reached the door, she hesitated. And then so softly, I almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "You'll break before I do, Mr. Calloway." And just like that, she was gone, leaving me, standing there, my hands clenched into fists. Because, for the first time, I knew she was right. This wasn't over.